This meeting is now being recorded.
Okay. And you want to hit it. Close that out. That out. Okay, good to go.
All right, here we go. So as I mentioned, the opening screen here is just their typical logo for their factory authorized parts. What we want to talk about today is basic cooling tower maintenance, the OEM value of the replacement parts, the importance of an inspection and questions. Most of the presentation will be talking about tower maintenance, preventive maintenance, and then we'll touch briefly on the parts and inspection. Should be plenty of time left over for questions. At some point, I'm sure some of you are going to realize that you could have given this presentation having spent many years working on cooling towers. So I'm not sure if anyone's seen a cooling tower like this. I know there used to be one off of Albany Street that you could see from the expressway. So this is the worst case of what can happen with a cooling tower. Obviously, this was one that I do not think was in operation, but this is what can happen with severe neglect. So the routine maintenance program in all of our operation and maintenance manuals, BAC and all manufacturers for that matter, have done a really good job of streamlining the information for the end user for facilities. Most manufacturers that I deal with lately have been inviting facilities people, engineers, and contractors to the factory as they begin to develop new products to get their opinion to see what to look for. Obviously, this checklist is pretty small print, but I'm going to read through some of the items just to give you an idea of what we're looking at. This is the beginning of, I think I got a couple of extras. There we go. So this is the beginning of one of our operation and maintenance manuals. One of the nice features this provides is it kind of gives you a breakdown of what all the parts are called, so that if you are working on a cooling tower and you need to talk to somebody at Emerson Swan or another representative and the factories, at least you guys are using the same nomenclature to help speed up the process of getting replacement parts. Let me see if sorry for jumping around here. I'm going to go back. So if you look at this maintenance checklist, off the first line item, which you cannot see, basically is saying inspect the general condition of the unit and check for unusual noise or vibration. A lot of a cooling tower inspection is just a look and listen. When you're doing your routine maintenance and you're on the roof or you're near the cooling tower, just pause for a moment, take a look, make sure there aren't any leaks, any unusual noises. Obviously, if there's a leak, you should address it right away. Investigate whether it's possibly just a seam leaking or whether there's corrosion to the distribution basins or the collection basins. The other item to be aware of is any excessive noise or vibration, because you're going to want to look for any imbalance on the fans. Maybe you got a loose belt, maybe there's an issue with a gear, or maybe you're headed towards bearing failure. Another thing it lists here is inspect the cold and hot water basins. Again, checking for leaks, make sure that the water levels are satisfactory, make sure you're getting even distribution over the fill. We're going to touch on these points in a little bit more detail later on, but I just wanted to kind of call them out for you. Inspect the air intake louvers. The cooling tower is the world's greatest air scrubber. So whatever is in the air, whether your tower's on grade or on the roof, it's going to be pulling in any debris or leaves or things of that matter. So keeping the basin clean is very important to keep the efficiency of your system going, to keep the chemicals in your cooling tower working properly. Check the operation of the makeup valve. We have two types. We have a float-operated makeup, which is kind of the standard. We also have an electric water level control. The float-operated makeup is your typical float and ball valve, similar to a toilet makeup. The electric water level control is a series of probes that senses the water. Typically, you have high and low high and low level alarms along with that. So you want to check the operation to make sure you're not overflowing or pulling air into your system by too low of a level. A couple of other things, as you go down through the middle of this, you've got the mechanical equipment system. You want to check the belt condition. You want to check the belt tension. It talks about lubricating the fan shaft bearings, lubricate the motor base adjusting screw, check and lubricate if you have a gear or a direct drive motor. Check the drive alignment. Occasionally you want to check, they're saying quarterly to check the motor voltage and current. A lot of the recommended frequencies of your maintenance is dependent on your cooling tower, the location of it. So you'll get to know your piece of equipment and you'll know whether you have to do it monthly, quarterly, or annually, depending on the operation of it. It recommends that you clean the fan motor exterior, check it for proper rotation, check the general condition of the fan. Most manufacturers have 3 types of fans. Now you have your standard aluminum, you have a standard galvanized fan, an aluminum fan, and a lot of the ultra quiet or whisper quiet fans that are used now today are actually a fiberglass or a poly material. So you want to check the general condition of your fan, make sure there's no cracks, make sure there's no loose bolts. You want to check the fan, you want to make sure that if you do have hollow blade fans, that the drain holes are not obstructed. You don't want any water collecting there that can freeze and crack your fan blade. Make sure the fan guard is properly installed. And then jumping down to the basin heaters, if you do have them, make sure that they're operating properly. Typical basin heater is designed to come on when the ambient temperature drops below 40 degrees. It maintains the temperature in your basin to keep that from freezing solid. Checking the vibration cutout switch if you have one. Most prop fans, we strongly recommend. So it's an easy adjustment if you had to change that. But again, as we move on, showing this drawing again, it's just kind of a breakdown. This is, as an example today, I'm using the BAC Series 3000 cooling tower. It's a 2-sided air inlet induced draft cross-flow cooling tower, similar to the Marley NC tower and the Evapco XS, the Axis tower. So this is kind of the workhorse of the industry. I would say probably 60% of the cooling towers you'll see will be similar to this design across New England. So again, very tough to read, but it talks about cleaning the cooling tower. And these 3 items here, the cleaning of it, the inspection, the startup, most of the projects you will be working on or that you're taking over, the contractor's already done this. The cleaning of it is obviously after cooling tower ships, gets rigged, and they starts getting flushed out and things like that. You just want to keep the debris from accumulating, any of the dirt that gets pulled in. Want to keep it clean. You want to, check the general condition of the equipment. As I mentioned before, you want to check the fan for any damage. You want to verify that the fan is spinning properly. That the fan cowl is not impeding on the rotation. And again, you want to check the gear oil levels. You want to adjust the belt tension. And then check to make sure your float is operating properly. Startup, a little bit later on in the O&M, it goes into some shutdown and seasonal if you do have a cooling tower that you shut down for the winter, and what to do to put it up for the winter and then, get it going again. Generally, my presentation that I'm going through today is what I would do if I was on site with you during an initial startup or training. Again, a lot of the information that you need, to be aware of is detailed in the O&Ms. So again, looks like I've got some duplicate slides here. The next page here that mentioned the extended shutdown. So it's going to recommend that as you shut down for the season, you're going to disconnect and lock out the fan motor, obviously. You close the shutoff valve in the makeup water line. You want to drain the tower, and that's to minimize any biological growth. You want to clean all debris from it, clean and flush the cold water basin and basin strainer in place, leave the cold water basin drain open so that rain and melting snow will drain from the unit. That way, if it was a heavy rainstorm or snow event, you're not going to get any freezing that could damage the basin. Again, it talks about cleaning the basin strainer, cover the fan discharge to keep out dirt and debris. That may not always be the case, but again, they're going to talk to you a little bit later on in the manual about cleaning the tower before you start it back up. Prolonged storage obviously would be a long shutdown, so that's going to talk about, most importantly, you're going to look at the motors. Our standard motors are for cooling tower service. It's not your average off-the-shelf motor. They recommend removing the motors and storing them inside whenever possible. I'm not sure how many people do that, but it's always good to make sure that we're going to keep that motor out of harm's way. Maintenance requirements, startup after preparation, again, very similar to the startup if it was a new job. Inspect the fans, you're going to bump the fan motor, check the rotation, adjust the belt drive, you're going to fill the tower and clean it. Okay, so here's where it gets into some of the detailed procedures that are recommended on that first page. Checking your water levels. The O&M manuals will give you the recommended operating level, whether it's a distribution, for the distribution basin in this case. Proper coverage of the fill in a cooling tower is essential, number one, for your system's efficiency, but number two, to reduce scaling and any biological growth on the fill. Maintaining the cooling tower is important for the longevity of it, but it's also important to keep your systems operating as efficiently as possible. We'll get into that a little bit later. I got a couple of slides that show the difference between clean fill and not so clean fill. Fan motor, as I mentioned before, the Series 3000 uses an axial fan. They recommend, again, checking for any unusual noise or vibration. You can inspect when the tower is shut off, inspect it for any loose or missing bolts in the fan shaft bushing, fan hub, or the fan shaft bearing. You want to check the fan blades to make sure they're not loose. You can twist them by hand. You can check the rotation of the entire fan assembly by hand. You want to make sure that there's not excessive buildup depending on your location, where it's installed. Again, checking for cracks. A lot of the preventive maintenance of cooling towers starts with the look and listen philosophy. It always recommends after starting this up, whether it's a new installation or starting it up again for the first time, is to readdress the fan belt tension if you're using a belt, or verifying that your gear and the gear drive assembly is still in alignment. Fan drive system, like I said, there's usually three different kinds. We have you have your belt drive, which historically Baltimore Air Coil has promoted belt drive. It's their opinion that it's an easier fix if you do have a problem. One of the things that we all know is when cooling towers go down, they don't always go down at 9:30 on Monday morning. Sometimes they go down at 5 o'clock on Friday or over the weekend. So keeping a spare belt on hand is relatively an inexpensive piece of inventory, or you could also, get by through the weekend with 4 or 5 belts from the auto parts store if you had to. Next page in the O&M is a quick guide to direct you on how to check the belt tension. 75% of the time when these towers get started up in the field, they're factory set from the factory, but over time the belts will wear, and they are requirements to check the belt tension and pretty simple adjustment technique. Also, you can see, it's tough to see, but the drive alignment, you can see how the shivs are supposed to be in alignment, which may indicate some issues with bearing assemblies. BAC has introduced a direct drive motor. It's a Baldor motor with direct drive, so there's no gear and no belt. The motor directly drives drives your fan. It is only available on this series cooling tower, and I believe right now 25 horsepower and above. But this has been an option that facilities people have been asking for years, and it's been an option that cooling tower manufacturers have been talking about for years, but it is now available on the BAC cooling tower for this particular unit. And again, it's giving you the same recommendations on how to start it up and how to check to make sure that this type of drive system is operating properly. I guess one of the number one things that that I think you guys as maintenance personnel, as preventive maintenance, is lubricating the bearings. So as we know, bearing grease loses its lubrication ability over time. It's not really suddenly. So if you keep up on it, you'll extend the life of those bearings and reduce the downtime that you'll face if you do have an issue. Again, lubrication procedure that many of you are probably already familiar with. Wipe all dirt from the outside of the grease fills and drains. Locate the grease inlet at the top of the bearing hub, clean the area, and replace the pipe plug with a grease fitting if the motor is not equipped. So there's different areas. There's the motors and the bearings to grease. Most manufacturers offer an extended lubrication line so that you can re-grease the bearings from outside of the cooling tower so that you're not crawling in or trying to work off a ladder or a platform inside of the tower. So again, just pointing out that, having these O&M on hand is a very important piece of your toolbox, if you will. Again, BAC also and most manufacturers offer optional gear drives. I'm sure you have plenty of towers. I believe the towers on this building actually have a gear drive. So again, another list of things to look out for. With a gear drive, the oil change and making sure that the gear is, well oiled is important to the life of that, life of the unit. So your routine maintenance is located on this, is located on this page. You want to recheck the alignment and tighten the fasteners if necessary. Really nothing special other than that. If your gears are equipped with a low-speed option, you want to make sure that the oil supply to the upper bearing level is satisfactory. Running a gear at lower speeds through a VFD, the concern is that the slinger is not getting the oil all the way through the unit. So that's a factor when utilizing a gear. This page is helpful, gives you the recommended oil and lubricants. I don't think any of them are too special. There's a number of them there, so if your local supplier has one or the other in stock, you should be able to get it very quickly. It also indicates the gear model and how many gallons or liters that it requires. And again, most manufacturers are going to list this information in their O&Ms. This just calls out different model numbers and the model gear so that you know the quantities and the volume that it requires. Quick fan guard installation guide, depending on the size of the unit. We've got 1-piece, 2-piece, 4-piece. This is probably only going to come into play if you have to remove a motor for whatever reason. Sometimes it's easier just to pull the fan guard and pull it from the top. Most manufacturers these days have a standard 5-year warranty on the motor. The only catch there is that warranty is on the motor manufacturer, so it's the owner's responsibility to remove the motor, take it to the motor shop to have it inspected and either replaced or repaired, depending if it's considered under warranty. So the mechanical drivetrain, again, is warranted for 5 years, including the motor, but the labor and the time to get it back to a motor shop is on the owner. Again, fan motors, and talking about fan lubrication, the importance of lubrication of the fan shaft bearings. They recommend only lubricating the bearings with manual grease gun or the BAC's optional automatic bearing greaser. A little propaganda. I think everyone offers that automatic bearing greaser. It is a pricey item. Typically, we extend the lubrication lines and we see the bearings lubricated manually. Again, it lists the manufacturers and the type of lubricants that are recommended. Heat transfer section, that's the fill we've talked about. The fill and the fan motor are really the, I guess, the heart and soul of the cooling tower. Cooling tower manufacturers spend a lot of time, a lot of research and development money trying to develop a better fill, that if they could get a half a degree better performance out, that's a huge win for them. So the fill is something that is spends a lot of time in the research and development. So the cleaner you can keep the fill, the more efficient the cooling tower will be. Hot water basin, that's on the top of the tower. These towers, specific towers, are gravity feed. So inspecting the nozzles is important, making sure that they're not clogged. One thing to be aware of, we've seen people take a screwdriver and to clean the nozzles, and they go through the hot water basin down through the nozzles. Well, what that generally does is it will damage the nozzle because there's a deflector plate on the bottom of that nozzle that distributes the water over the fill. So it's very important not to puncture or not put anything down through that nozzle. If it is dirty, most of those nozzles will twist out for cleaning. Operating level, again, earlier in the O&M manual you saw how many inches it should be for different types of unit. You want to make sure it doesn't get too low because it won't have proper coverage. You want to make sure it doesn't get too high because then you'll start to overflow. And if you're running this during the swing seasons or during the winter, you'll get some ice buildup. During the winter, if you see ice buildup on the outside of your tower, which is very common in New England, a rule of thumb is if it's ice building from the top down, it's typically a balancing issue, and you've got too much water going to your cooling tower. If you see ice build up from the bottom up, it means that your controls may be a little bit off, and you're trying to generate too cold of condenser water coming out of the tower. So, easy way to tell. Most fan motors are reversible, so that if you wanted to reverse the direction of your fan motor to kind of blow some ice off your cooling tower, that can be done. It's usually done by reversing the leads in the VFD or in the motor control center. Moving on, so here's those pages we just went through was the O&M manual that they asked them to insert. This is going to be kind of a recap of some of the things we've talked about. As you can see, the picture up on the right-hand side, that is a pressurized distribution system. That would be in your centrifugal fan towers typically. So there's spray nozzles there. Those PVC headers are all pressurized. So you can just see that the even distribution over the fill. So if you pulled off your drift eliminators from the tower and looked down, this is what you saw. That's a pretty good indication that your nozzles are clean and you're getting a good distribution over your fill. Or your coil, if it happens to be. That actually looks like a coil product in a closed circuit cooling tower. The drawing or the photo down below is a gentleman on top of one of the Series 3000 towers that we just reviewed. He has taken the basin covers off and he's looking down at a hot water distribution basin. All of the black dots or the black circles, that's the top of the distribution nozzles. You can see he's got one in his hands. He's twisted it out to inspect it. So it's very important to keep your water distribution clean. Number one reason is for the efficiency of your cooling tower. But again, too, if you're operating during the winter season, even distribution is key, because if you don't get it, that's when you start to develop ice. Again, this is on the spray. This is what a typical water distribution system would look like out of the spray nozzles. This is the picture I mentioned to you earlier, that you see the scale and growth build up on your fill of a cooling tower. That is causing the efficiency in your system to suffer, and that could very well be from wet-dry operation with an imbalance in your distribution system. If you get wet-dry, scale seems to develop much quicker. So we're trying to keep that, number one, that scale and that film to stay as a minimum. The drawing on the left, as you look at it, is actually not bad compared to the drawing on the right. So if you look at good fill versus bad fill, obviously it's pretty obvious that on the left you've got a pretty clean tower operating at peak efficiency. On the right, you've got a pretty scaled up piece of equipment. Eventually, it will be scaled up and fouled up enough where you may need to pull it down and try to clean it, or eventually replace it in place. The mechanical drive system we talked about on this specific induced draft prop fan tower, you've got your bushings, fans, belts, gears, bearings, shafts, and motors. Typically on a cooling tower, on a retrofit or preventative maintenance, you're looking more on the bushings, bearings, and the belts. Typically, in most operations, your fan shaft has a pretty good longevity, lifespan. It's really the bearings and the belts that you need to be worried about. Cooling tower operates too long with a belt that's out of alignment. Obviously, you can have damaged bearings. Again, another view of it. I like these blow-ups and these cutaways because it at least allows everyone to be on the same page. If you're calling a manufacturer asking for a part, if they send you this, at least when you know what a locking collar is versus the flinging collar, and you got the upper bearing and the lower bearing. At least everybody's on the same page, so you get what you want the first time. The motors. BAC uses a TEAO and TEFC motors. Premium efficiency, double sealed, permanently lubricated, condensation vents for cooling tower service. I mentioned the 5-year motor warranty, which is again held through the motor manufacturer. And as with most equipment these days, only premium efficient motors are available. So if you have, on any new installation, you're going to get a premium efficient motor, inverter duty ready for VFD service, and it's going to be reversible. The bearings are specially designed for the cooling tower industry. As I mentioned earlier, the cooling tower is the world's greatest air scrubber, but it's also a pretty violent, it's almost a hurricane effect inside of it. You've got high winds and introducing water to high winds. So it's a hurricane type environment, so the motors and the bearings and the bushings and everything need to be top grade in order to withstand that type of environment. Again, BAC put a little propaganda into this presentation about BAC is the only source. Again, most cooling tower manufacturers will provide parts for competitors. It's up to you guys who you get your parts from. This is an automatic bearing greaser that was mentioned earlier. It is an option. There is labor savings by eliminating to do it monthly manually. Obviously, you can set it varying the output depending on what your specific installation requires. Recommended spares. We recommend, a bearing set, float valve, float ball, solenoid valve if you have the electric water level control, maybe a set of belts. nozzle kits, depending on your environment. Some of these things that, depending on where your cooling tower is located and the quality of your water, you may decide that, I haven't had to clean a nozzle in 6 years. Why do I need nozzle kits on site, which would be probably the right decision. We do stock some parts in Randolph, Mass, in our warehouse, mostly float valves, a few bearings, some heaters, belts, things of that nature that can easily be shipped overnight. So, the perfect fit, guaranteed fit, 1-year warranty, maintain or improve original performance, retain performance as originally certified by the CTI, which is the CTI governs the performance of cooling towers, and specifiable value-added differences. This is addressing both replacement parts, and it's also addressing the engineers in the room who are designing these products. BAC, most of the manufacturers, and I'll say their names, BAC, Avapco, and Marley are the big three, and, they've all been around for a long time. They all spend a lot of money in research and development trying to improve not only the performance of their cooling towers, but the longevity. So, again, BAC cooling towers have a 1-year standard warranty on all components, 5-year warranty on the mechanical drive system, and if you go upgrade to a stainless steel basin, there's a 5-year leak-proof warranty there as well. Quality materials, again, if you are ever involved in the discussions leading up into a new project, we've got basis of design. We use G235 galvanized material. We also have a corrosion protection system that we would apply over that. And then you can also go to 304 stainless steel, or again, a Tri-Armor corrosion protection system. That's a polymer coating on top of the galvanized. We recommend, especially in New England, most of the specifications we see at a minimum is a 304 stainless steel cold water basin. The cold water basin is the most expensive component of your cooling tower, and if you add the fact that you have to get a crane to remove it to replace it, it makes sense to upgrade that material on new projects. I'm going to skip over the parts propaganda here if you don't mind. Again, it looks like I've got some duplicate slides in here. The BAC cross-flow bearings, we've talked about that, the automatic motor. Fan wheels. BAC makes their own fan wheels, fan shafts. This is for the centrifugal fan cooling towers. Most manufacturers, I think, are doing the same thing. This is the squirrel cage fan, and we use stainless steel fan shafts. So that's a specifiable item that extends the life of your cooling tower. Very difficult from the outside to take a look to see whether your fan shaft is corroding to the point where it needs to be replaced. So the concerns that owners and operators have are, the guys in the corner office are very concerned with operating costs. And along with operating costs come the energy consumption and conservation. The more fouled your system gets, the harder that chiller has to work, and the more expensive it costs to operate your building. So maintaining your cooling tower, again, I think I mentioned it at the onset of the presentation, it is not only to extend the life of it and to keep you guys busy elsewhere, but it's to operate your building as efficiently and less costly as possible. Cooling tower upgrades, you can reduce energy usage, simplify maintenance, improve performance, lengthen life expectancy, and delay replacement expense. Get a picture of the belt drive. It's not a series, it's a power band is what they call it. So it's an industrial grade belt. As you can see, I believe that one's 6 belts in one. Pretty inexpensive and not a very big piece of equipment if you have to store it on site. You can see here in the middle the vibration cutout switch that hasn't been wired yet. So obviously this is a photo that was taken at the plant before a cooling tower shipped out. Pony motor fan systems, you may run into these. This was, years ago, this was the poor man's VFD, where we would put on a pony motor that was about a third of the main fan motor, so that if you had reduced capacities during the year, that tower could run off a smaller motor, and again, reducing capacity, or reducing the cost to operate. This is, here's an area that I think gets neglected in the design phases and the buyout of cooling towers. This is where, these are benefits to the owner. As you can see on the side going from left to right, we have some external service platforms that allow you to inspect the hot water distribution basins on top of the tower without actually having to get on top of the basin. As you move over to the right, you can see the internal service platforms that allow you to work on the belts, the gears, remove a motor without having to be hanging off a ladder. It's really for the safety of you, the maintenance personnel. So when at all possible, working with engineers, or if we work directly with an owner, this is obviously something we recommend making its way into the project specification. Again, you can see a gentleman here adjusting the belt tension by moving that motor, and he's standing in a nice comfortable position and doesn't have to hang off a ladder to do it. External service platforms, again, using the Series 3000 or the Crossflow tower as an example, you'll see many of the towers in the area with galvanized perimeter handrails, so you're climbing all the way to the top of the tower. This is an additional feature that makes inspecting and working on the hot water distribution basins a little bit more easier for you, the owner. And again, with all things in life, you know, this extra advantage does come with a little bit more of a premium up front. Resources. Get to know your local, I'll cover up the BAC, but your local cooling tower sales representative. One of the things that we offer, and I know the competitors offer, is a free cooling tower inspection. So if you're concerned about the general condition of your cooling tower, you know, call your cooling tower rep up, have them come out and take an inspection. Number one, they can run through the tower's operation if you're not familiar with exactly how it works. And number two, they can tell you how many seasons they think you can still get out of it, whether, you know, the bearings are starting to go, whether your fan housings are starting to go, whether that shaft looks like it may need replacing. You know, obviously they're doing this with the hope that, you know, you purchase parts through them, but my experience is people have been pretty honest about conditions of the cooling towers. So take advantage of it. It's a free service. It's something that our manufacturers really want the reps to do. So, a couple of funny slides here before I finish with, you know, probably the number one thing with cooling tower thing. And, you know, we were talking, Tom and I were talking before the presentation. I arrived a little early, but it's always interesting how what the customer expects versus what gets designed. So, you know, here's what you expected: a nice little 3-tier ladder swing. You know, here's kind of how the engineer designed it. So the engineer's in the room. You know, this is how marketing presented it. You know, this is how the project was documented, so no one knew who was doing what. This is how it was installed. This is how you were billed. And this is what you really needed. So, you know, in talking with Tom, you know, I know it's not possible and it's not how our industry works, but you know, most of the time when I'm on site with a facilities guy, it would be nice if the facilities guy was brought in early on in a project so that they could get what they want, considering you guys are going to be taking care of it. So, to kind of finish up here, we're running out of time. I want to give you guys time for questions. One of the things that this PowerPoint presentation didn't really address is water quality. BAC is not in the chemical treatment business, but they are in the water quality business in the sense that they list the proper water quality guidelines in their O&M. So maybe other than keeping your cooling tower clean and making sure that all the mechanical systems are operating properly, the most important thing you guys can do is chemically treat your cooling tower, whether it's through a traditional liquid chemical system, whether it's a solid chemistry system, or whether it's a non-chemical treatment system. Maintaining water quality to make sure that the materials and the metals in your system are being maintained for the longest life possible is key. In addition to protecting your metals, the chemical treatment will keep your biologicals, it'll keep the film down, it'll keep your scaling down to let the system operate properly. We deal with a lot of systems from, we deal with some systems that cannot be down. Your N+1s of the world, some of these data centers, if their cooling tower goes down for an hour, it's millions and millions of dollars. So obviously redundancy gets built in, but water quality is key. Again, BAC doesn't address it directly because they're not in the water treatment business, but it directly affects the life of that cooling tower and the efficiency of system operation. Finish up with a couple of slides, again, with the unit inspections. Please take us up on that. Call your local cooling tower rep if it's not a BAC tower. I think you'll find that invaluable for information on how your cooling tower works, how it operates, and it will give you a good idea of on the preventive maintenance of what needs to be done either this season or what you can get away with waiting until next season. So with that, we'll open it up to questions.
And so we'll see. I guess you can scroll down here. That's all that.
Looks like no one's typed a question yet in the public chat, but if there's anything, and again, I used one cooling tower as an example. Tried to give you a general overview of what to look for with cooling towers. I hope you found it somewhat useful, but again, if you have specific questions, we can talk about them now. If it's something you think we need to look at. Okay, so we do have one question. What type of PPE should be used when doing an end-of-season cleaning? I don't have that information off the top of my head. I didn't bring that section of the O&M manual, but that is something I can get recommendations from BAC from. I think it is just a general. I don't think it's anything crazy. It's not an acid or things like that. I do think it's just a general cleaning, but before I speak out of turn, I'd like to get that clarified.
We'll distribute that information on the MAFA listserv.
Explain Legionnaire's disease. That is a 3-day discussion in itself. I'm not going to address Legionnaire's disease. Legionella is a huge issue right now. ASHRAE and even some government agencies are coming out with some regulations on, number one, how to address it. I know a lot of hospitals are being required to have Legionella experts on staff. I don't want to say too much about Legionella because it's a very touchy subject these days, and I'm not an expert on it. I will say that cases of Legionella in cooling towers locally are few and far between. Is that okay on that, Tom?
Yeah.
Yes. Anything else? I'll throw out there that, Baltimore is only a 50-minute flight from the Boston or Providence area. If anyone's interested in a day trip or a couple of day trip to maybe climb around on a few of their different towers, that's always, an opportunity. Next comment, talk about the performance characteristics of a tower so people know what to expect if it is working correctly. generally working correctly on the cooling tower. We're worried about that leaving water temperature. The tower is designed to cool the return water temperature, which nominally is 95 degrees, and we want to cool that full flow down to 85 at a 78-degree wet bulb. Generally, your towers are going to be put on a variable frequency drive on the fan motor. That's your capacity control. So if the tower is able to meet your 78 degrees at a reduced speed, that is excellent. That means that the tower is operating efficiently. It'll be very difficult to tell. The following is going to be difficult to tell on a tower: that your tower would still meet your 78 degree, or your 85 degree leaving water temperature, even if it had to run a little bit longer. I think the key with the cooling tower is the look and listen approach. As far as preventive maintenance, you want to make sure everything sounds okay, you don't have any vibrations, there's no leaks going on. But you may run into a situation if during the summer, if you're not able to, meet your peak load, there may be something else going on with the tower where it's not operating efficiently. If your fill is fouled significantly, that water's not passing through it, you may run into instances in summer conditions, worst case conditions, where you're not able to cool your building. Not an exact answer, but an answer nonetheless. Oh, thank you. Great webinar, and the timing is perfect with the season change. Well, again, thank you very much for that. And again, with the season change, and if you're putting some towers up, and you want somebody to come take a look, let us know. We'll take a look, let you know what we think may need to be looked at before you fire them up again in the spring. But again, like I said, we're local. We're in Randolph, Mass, and most of the time, guys are looking to get out of the office. Any recommendations for data collection to trend performance over time, particular readings, record review? That's a good question. I think what we've seen in two different areas, I've seen trends. Number one, in the chemical treatment, to see, how the cycles of concentration vary, what the blowdown has done, but the chemical treatment person that you hired to do that usually keep pretty good records, and that's just to see if you've had any spike in certain chemicals or any lack of treatment over time that may have affected. As far as data collection to trend performance over time, depending on how sophisticated your system is, the building management system, you can trend your leaving water temperature, which is your return temperature to the building, versus the wet bulb over time. Chris, you got any other ideas on that as far as trending what you typically see?
We try to use some power usage. It's always a trade-off. I don't know if you can see me or hear me, but trade-off between higher delta T to allow the towers to run better, but then maybe lose a little bit of the chillers versus the other way around.
Right. There's a lot of things. The readings are great to see what's going on, but there's a lot of on the design side of things where I spend a lot of time. There is a lot of time put into using different temperatures, a larger delta T, to reduce the the overall flow versus how the internal equipment performance. Trying to maximize the overall efficiency of the system versus just giving you, the smallest tower or the biggest tower at the lowest horsepower. So it's all, interrupted, just reading. It says, keep an eye on the amps on the motors and check loose bolts. Thank you. So as far as back to the readings, to finish that up, it's really what information, you guys would like to see. Like I said, most towers these days are CTI certified, and what that means is, 3 or 4 times a year, CTI will call up the manufacturers with their catalog in front of them and say, I want you to build me this tower, this tower, this tower, this tower. The manufacturer has to build it. They come in, third-party independent test, and they need to be within a certain percentage, plus or minus, of the performance. So most equipment that you guys, if it's from the big 3 manufacturers, most equipment you guys are getting on site has been thoroughly factory tested by a third party. So, what readings you guys are looking for is really kind of up to what the goal is.
So I think that's going to be all the questions we're going to take. We're going to try one more thing here. Let's just make sure. It looks like there's one question up here.
There's a question, is use of recycled gray water common and or feasible option in cooling towers to reduce cost use of potable water? Absolutely. Absolutely. We're in an interesting area. Other parts of the country have mandated the collection of rainwater and the uses of it. I believe New York City, Philadelphia, a lot of installations in the Southwest, you will see the collection of rainwater or recycled gray water used for, irrigation. But the biggest use, there will be a collection of rainwater used for makeup water in the cooling towers. Filtration of that unit is very important, obviously. You got to be very careful of there's different ways of doing it, but the one commonly seen, it's an electric pulse technology where there's 2 electric pulses. The first one negates the particles in your system so that instead of adhering to the metal in your loop, they adhere to each other, and then they eventually drop out either in your cooling tower basin or removed through filtration. And the second pulse that gets sent actually damages the bacteria. Oops, I can't hear you anymore. Can everybody hear me? Maybe not. Okay, so, we see a lot of reuse of the cooling tower blow down and drain in non-chemical water. Recycled gray water and rainwater, you got to be very careful about how you filter that and how you treat it to put it back. But non-chemical blow down is used quite a bit, and other parts of the country, they earn several LEED points for it. But in New England, we get a fair amount of rain, so, it's usually not as common as you'd see it in other parts of the country.
Okay, so that concludes the presentation right now. As we told everybody, we're going to repeat this in a short time frame. I'm going to let Chris take a break here so we can do whatever he wants to do, and then we'll come back online again. Unless you want to stay there and listen to the whole thing again, that's okay. But we have recorded this, and we'll be posting it on. And again, I want to thank 2 Chris's here for putting this together. I think this is an excellent presentation, and I can see by the questions and everything like that. So if you have other questions that come up, you can send them to me. I can forward them to our friends here and get some answers back to you. So again, thank you all for attending, and look forward to seeing you again on the next training, and look forward to anybody that's going to be on the 3rd shift here. Thanks again. Good afternoon. This is Tom Tagan I'm the Director of Facility Resources. We're going to start in a couple of minutes because with third shift I wasn't sure how many people would come on. We do have a number of people on here right now, but I do want to just give it 1 or 2 more minutes before we actually start the presentation. Just a couple of things. This is to those that are on here, this is one of many webinar trainings that we're going to be putting on right through to May on new equipment that we've been installing in the facilities to kind of like familiarize yourself with some of the operation and maintenance issues with the new equipment. The first one, this is our very first one, it's going to be on cooling towers. We just finished the presentation from 2 to 3, and it was an excellent presentation. I had a lot of questions. If you have questions, I would ask you to hold off on them, and then at the end of the presentation, there will be a period where you can either use the question and answer tab or you can do public chat. We'll read them out and we'll answer them for you. I think I already said we're recording this and we're going to be putting it on the MAPMA website. I'm going to record the first presentation and put it on. If we have extra questions that weren't asked the first time, we'll put those on there too so we get some answers. So with that, I'm going to, I want to thank, right before we start, I want to thank 2 individuals. They're both here in my office. One is Chris Ham. He works for RDK, and I really want to thank RDK because they're actually the people that have been putting together all of these trainings. They've been reaching out to the vendors, manufacturers, reps, and putting these together. I really thank them. And I think it's going to be an excellent program for everybody. And remember, just like our safety certification program, if you take all these classes and we can document that you took them, we will be issuing you a certificate of completion next year, probably next June, like we're putting together the safety certification documents that we're going to be giving out at our next semi-annual. The last thing I also want to thank Chris Wilson, who's actually going to be, he's a sales engineer for Emerson Swan, and he's going to be actually doing the presentation. He'll be doing an excellent job. But the last thing I just want to tell you is to remind everybody, all my MAPMA members, that we'll be running our next semi-annual MAPMA meeting is going to be on December the 7th, and I'll be sending out on the listserv, but it will be at the Fish and Wildlife headquarters in Westboro. So looking forward to seeing many of you there, and that's where we'll be handing out the safety certifications to everyone. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Chris. He'll start the presentation. And thank you all, Second Shift, for attending this. But there could be multiple.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Chris Wilson. I work with Emerson Swan. We are the Baltimore Air Coil Cooling Tower representative. I've been working in the HVAC industry, specifically with cooling towers, for almost 25 years, representing BAC and a major competitor for a short time. So very familiar on the design and sales side. Some of you guys may be more familiar than me on the maintenance side of things, but I wanted to come in today and kind of give you a general overview of cooling towers and preventive maintenance and things to look out for. You're going to find some BAC propaganda throughout this presentation. They snuck it in on me, so I'll try to point out where they're doing that and where we can skip over it. So we'll get started here. Again, we had some great questions during the first session, and once we get through this, if you have any questions, make a note of it and let us know at the end. I'll try to answer everything we can. So the first bit of propaganda is the BAC factory authorized parts. I'm not going to be spending a lot of time on parts other than to let you know that they're available. BAC a number of years ago dedicated a section of their business to the aftermarket. They have its own little profit center. I believe they still call it the Parts Depot, so that anything you guys may need is available next day air. And Emerson Swan, located in Randolph, we also stock various parts, smaller parts that help you get through the weekend if you did run into a jam. So the presentation's not on parts, but they give me this as a header. So as we move along, so today I want to talk about just basic cooling tower maintenance. I've selected one particular product line that I'm going to use as the overview. A lot of these points I'm going to make will apply to all kinds of cooling towers, but if there's something specific to your tower, we're always available at another time to review it. I'll be going over site inspections on that later. OEM value, that's kind of left over from their parts presentation. They want to stress the fact that, if you buy a part for a BAC tower from BAC, that you're getting one that'll fit. Again, the inspection importance. I'll throw it out there right now. We offer as a free service a cooling tower inspection. We have a couple of gentlemen, in addition to the salespeople at Emerson Swan, that'll come out and look, climb all over your tower. We have some service people that will come take a look. What that does is, number one, yes, we're looking to sell parts, but number two, we can help educate you on a specific tower application if you're not familiar with how the tower works. And three, we can also kind of give you a life expectancy of some of the components. So if we think you can get another season or another 2 seasons out of it, we'll let you know. If we think that it's going to fail midsummer and you should be buying some parts now, we're going to let you know that as well. So that's a service that we offer free of charge. It's a service that as a rep, I believe most cooling tower reps also offer that free of charge. So anyway, and then, like I said, we'll have some time for questions later on. Okay, so this one, I'm not sure if anyone's seen this cooling tower. I do not believe it's local, but I think we had one just off of Albany Street that looked like this with a nice cool. That tree is not actually behind the tower; it's actually growing out of the tower. So obviously, this is a tower that was probably not in operation, but had been severely neglected. Routine maintenance program. In the beginning of all the O&M manuals specific to cooling towers, we provide a maintenance checklist. I know the print is very small to see, but I'll review a little bit of some of the things they're pointing out. If you see all the check marks, that is the frequency they recommend of the preventive maintenance or the maintenance. So the first one is at startup. As you can see, they're all checked basically on startup. The next column is monthly, quarterly, annually, and shutdown. Well, what's important to know is that you'll learn your equipment better than we will learn your equipment. So you'll know how dirty towers get. You'll know how hard they're working. You're going to develop your own preventive maintenance schedule. Whether if we recommend it's monthly, you might do it quarterly, or if we recommend quarterly, you may end up doing it semi-annually. Again, I realize this is really small and hard to see, but first and foremost, inspect the general condition of the unit and check the unit for any unusual noise or vibration. Real easy to see, your initial inspection of the cooling tower is make sure there's no leaks and then make sure that it doesn't sound funny. If you've got any excessive vibration or any odd noises, you may have a fan out of balance, you may have a belt that needs to be tightened, a gear that may be out of alignment, or, you may have some bearings that are starting to go. So, first and foremost, look and listen. If you're up on the roof or wandering around your building, just stop for a moment, and if your tower's running, take a listen, see if everything sounds normal. It also lists inspecting the cold water basin. That's generally for leaks. You want to make sure that the levels, it's not overflowing, and it's also not at a low level. Being at a low level can introduce air into your system and cause pump cavitation and other issues. And again, later on in the presentation, I'm going to show you some specific pages in the O&M for this specific tower that detail, the tasks or the maintenance procedures that you need to perform. Real quickly, It's got the inspect the spray nozzles, drain the basin and piping. That is on startup. Check your water levels in both basins, whether it's a hot water basin or the cold water basin. Check and adjust the bleed rate. Generally, that's going to be done by your chemical treatment personnel. I don't have a lot of slides on chemical treatment, but at the end of the presentation, we'll spend some time talking. Chemical treatment and maintaining the materials and the metals in your tower may be as important as the preventative maintenance checklist that we're going to run through. Inspect the unit finish. You want to make sure that you're not getting any corrosion from the outside, depending on where it's located. If you're right on the water, your chemical treatment may be fine, but you may be giving your tower a salt bath, depending on how close to the ocean you are. Check your belt condition, adjust the belt tension if necessary. Lubricate your fan shaft bearings, lubricate your motor base adjusting screw, check and lubricate optional gear drive if you're using a gear. The lubrication and the oil of your cooling tower is probably the number one thing that you guys have on your list. It's probably the number one item that you can, or task that you can perform to extend the life of your bearings, keep your motor operating and your fan operating properly. Again, they're always recommended cleaning and checking the general condition of all the equipment, whether it's the fan motor, the inside of the cooling tower. You want to make sure that your fan blades are not loose, that there's no cracks in your fan blades. So as we move along, you're going to see a few slides that are duplicates. I apologize for that. That's something that I didn't pick up until the presentation was already put together and sent along. But we'll move along on to, this is the first page of the Series 3000 O&M manual. The Series 3000 cooling tower for BAC is their dual air inlet induced draft prop fan cooling tower. This is really the workhorse of their entire product line, very similar to the Marley NC and the Evapco Axis, the AXS product. So this is on most projects in New England, significant-sized towers. You're going to see this on 60 to 70% of the projects in the area. I know I was recorded on the first one, so it'll be interesting to see if my percentages compare there or not. So again, the reason I like these pages is it shows, which you probably can't see, but the fan guard, top water inlet, casing, makeup water valve, adjustable float. It just gives you a breakdown of the unit so that if you are calling the factory or calling your rep to replace some parts, everyone's using the same language so that we don't end up shipping you the wrong part and you don't schedule a shutdown on Saturday morning only to find out we got the wrong part because we weren't speaking the same language. Again, it jumps into cleaning, inspection, and startup. This information is usually taken care of when you take over a building. This is usually what the installing contractor goes through. But it is important if you have a site that shuts down over the winter. If you're going to drain your cooling tower and put your cooling tower up for the winter, later on in the O&M, it gives you guidelines how to do it, and it will refer back to these pages. A lot of it has to do with cleaning, inspection, and again, lubrication is key to most of these the moving components. Again, duplicate slide. I guess I really wanted to reinforce speaking the same language. Okay, moving on. Here's the extended shutdown piece. I wanted BAC to insert a number of pages from the O&M manual, because if one of us was on site with you on a new project training, doing owner training or tower startup, we refer heavily to the O&M, because that's the one piece of material that we leave behind that you're going to reference 6 to 8 months later when you go out to service your cooling tower. So this is the Bible, if you will. One thing we recommend doing when you do get your O&M, take the model and serial number from the nameplate on your cooling tower. All cooling towers are going to have a stainless steel nameplate with the model and serial number regardless of who the manufacturer is. Most manufacturers also put the belt number on there if it's a belt drive. The serial number allows the factory and the representative to quickly access everything that's been done to that tower. We'd be able to, after a 5 or 6 year period, we'd still be able to tell you what's been ordered. So if you're ordering the same part over and over again, that almost helps us identify if there was potential issues with the operation if something were to continuously fail. But it also helps us keep a record of the cooling tower so that we know exactly what part you need when you give it to us. So the serial number is key. Anytime you call up with a serial number, we should be able to identify, whatever item you're looking for.
Can I jump in for a second?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I just want to jump in for a second to remind everybody that in Camus, if it's a new install, a new replacement, it should be in Camus, and all that information can be documented there so that if you're not there anymore and somebody else is there, they can pull that information up.
Excellent. And we've started, internally in our office, we've started to keep electronic files versus the file folders. And a shout out to my inside guy, Josh Williams at Emerson Swan, is fantastic when it comes to researching existing units and tracking down what is actually installed locally. So, again, jumping back on the page, extended shutdown, if you're going to drain the tower, put it up for the winter and leave it, there's step-by-step instructions, and again, it starts with cleaning, talks about removing the dirt, talks about making sure that you grease and lubricate everything for the winter. Make sure it talks about draining the cooling tower, leaving the drain valve open so that you don't have any freeze issues, and then it talks about how to store the motor. It recommends removing the motor and storing it inside wherever possible. I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure I've ever seen anyone do that. But like I said, it goes step-by-step instructions, maintenance requirements on turning, it recommends on a monthly basis turning the motor, rotating the fans, preventing any water buildup, things like that. Startup procedures, preparation after that winter shutdown. Again, it's going to go back and reference the startup procedures on the first page, on the early pages of the O&M. Again, it's going to talk about making sure that your bearings and motor are lubricated. It's going to it's going to talk about checking water levels. It's going to talk about rotating and bumping your fan motor, making sure that your fans are not cracked, making sure that everything's pitched properly. The page here, the next page lists all the model numbers and the operating level, water level recommendations. Your cold water basin in this particular type of tower is gravity feed. So we're going to recommend there's a min and maximum level. I believe it's 2 and how many ever inches. These particular units, you'll see 8 3/4 inches to 9 3/4 inches. That will ensure proper flow over your fill. It's important to make sure we have nice, even fill distribution over the fill of your cooling tower. And again, we'll discuss that in depth a little bit more later. It's also important to make sure that we're not, that we don't have too much water, because then we're going to overflow. And in a winter situation, if you're operating these towers in the winter, you may get ice buildup. Ice buildup is not uncommon, especially in New England. As long as it's addressed fairly quickly, there won't be any damage to the cooling tower. Most fan motors these days are reversible, so you can actually reverse your fan, blow the air back through your cooling tower to remove the ice. One trick that we've learned over the years that if you see ice build up from your cooling tower and the ice is starting from the top down, you've got balancing or flow issues, and your hot water distribution basins are probably overflowing. That's where these water levels come in. If you're building ice from the bottom up, it may be more of a control issue where you're trying to create too cold of a water during a free cooling, low water temperature situation. So a couple of things to think about. Again, more detailed instructions on inspecting the fan. Make sure that the fan blades are not loose. Make sure that they're not cracked. With sound-sensitive situations these days, all manufacturers have 3 different types of fans. Some are galvanized steel, some are an aluminum blade, some are a a plastic or almost a fiberglass construction. So you want to just make sure that you don't see any cracks. Make sure that the fan cowl is not impinging. Your fans are not hitting the side or rubbing up against your fan cowl. If so, obviously for safety reasons, you want to shut that down and readjust everything. And again, this is a detailed list of how to go about looking at that. Fan drive system, 3 typical, 2 typical and 1 fairly new. We have a belt drive system, which I'm sure you've all seen. We have a gear drive system, which most of you, I believe, have seen. This page jumps into belt tension, checking the tension, how to adjust the tension. The diagrams in the lower portion of the presentation show the alignment of the fan shivs. This may indicate you starting to have some bearing or bushing failure. Again, all of these things that you'll learn in your tower and its operation, and you'll know whether you have to check that on a monthly basis or every couple of months. You'll start to learn and be able to develop your preventive maintenance schedule based on your specific application. We're going to skip over the gear, which we'll get to in a second, but BAC has also come out with a direct drive. They have an agreement with Baldor for this specific tower, the Series 3000, and I believe it's 25 horsepower and above. We can now provide a direct drive fan motor. So what that does is it eliminates any belts, it eliminates any gear, it eliminates the additional oiling of those or lubrication of those bearings. Those additional failures get taken out of the picture. Obviously, on initial design, there's going to be a little more first cost, but this is something that the facilities community has been asking for years. We used to get requests for it years ago where people such as yourself would open an industry magazine and say, wow, direct drive motors, I'd really like that on my tower. Well, no one really had it. I know Baldor introduced it years ago at an ASHRAE conference, but they never really developed it at a cost point for the cooling tower industry until now. So that's an option to think about if you do have, if there is justice in the world, you guys would have some influence on the design of all your new facilities. So that's just something to think about, the direct drive motor. A little bit of propaganda, but it is just a third option on how to turn that fan. Again, it goes through, it gives you all the specific lubrication procedures on the bearings, on the fan motors, and it talks about, maintaining that particular type of drive system. And again, your traditional gear, we've often, the belt drive, the belt-driven system has been, it's a heavy-duty system. It's not a single belt. It's a power band. It's very reliable, very relatively inexpensive to repair if you have a problem, and we think it reduces downtime. So we really encourage the belt, but there are a lot of people who still like the old reliable gear, and we do offer the gear drive. Again, very detailed instructions on how to go about maintaining the gear in the O&M manual. Again, lubrication, this recommended oils, recommended lubricants. I think you'll find here that there's a number on this list that can be purchased locally at your local supplier. I think Grainger stocks a lot of these things, but whoever you normally get this type of material from, I don't think you're going to find anything on this list that's hard to find. And again, the gear models, it tells you how many gallons, what the volume you're going to need. And it also now, on this page, it lists that gear model for all of the different models of this particular unit. I think you're going to find this similar of all cooling tower manufacturers and their O&M manuals. Fan guard installation just shows you 1-piece, 2-piece, and 4-piece based on the size of your cooling tower. Generally, you're not going to need to take the fan guard off and put it back on, but if you do have to remove or replace a motor, sometimes it's easier to pull it out the top of the tower than to try to drop it down into the tower and pull it out the side, especially if you have an old tower that doesn't have internal access, or if you have multiple cells. sometimes it's easier to drop it over the side of the installation versus trying to pull it through 3 or 4 different doors. The warranty on cooling towers, and I believe this is true for all the major manufacturers, it's a 5-year warranty on the drive system, and that includes the fan motor. The one fine print on that is the fan motor warranty is held by the motor manufacturer, so it's your responsibility to remove the motor, get it back to a motor shop, have them inspect it, and then they'll determine if it is under warranty whether they're going to repair it or replace it with a new one. That's the fine print that I wanted to bring to your attention, because a lot of times people are like, yeah, it's a 5-year warranty. Yeah, sorry, but it's up to you to get the motor back to the motor manufacturer, and I believe that's true for all 3 of the major manufacturers at least. So again, just some assembly instructions in case you ever had to put that back together. I'm going to assume most of you are going to figure that out in the field anyway. So again, fan motor, fan shaft bearings. Again, telling you the lubricants you see down here. It's giving you brand names and models, or brand names on the lubricants. Heat transfer section. I talked about that briefly. The heat transfer section is the fill. That's really the heart of your cooling tower. Cooling tower manufacturers spend a lot of time and money in research and development of new fill. The more they can break that water up coming down and across the air, the more efficient they can make their cooling tower. The more cooling you can get out of a smaller box at a smaller horsepower makes you more competitive on bid day. So they spend a lot of time trying to provide the most efficient fill as possible. So as an owner, it's your responsibility to try to keep that fill as clean as possible, to keep that tower as efficient as possible. I know on a day-to-day basis, trying to keep equipment up and running just to keep everybody happy is the main goal. But from a big picture, owners and developers want their system, their HVA system, to operate as efficiently as possible to save money. Energy costs money. So the dirtier the fill gets, the less efficient the cooling tower gets, the longer it has to run, the more electricity has to be spent. These are the hot water basin covers. They would be removed when you go to inspect a hot water basin. Later on, I've got a picture of someone actually standing near it. Want to be very careful with gravity-fed hot water distribution basins. The nozzles are plastic, and there's a deflector plate that sits below the basin. So if you randomly take a screwdriver to start to unclog these nozzles, if they end up being clogged, you may break that deflector plate from the nozzle and cause just as much problems as having a plugged nozzle. So be careful. Most of them twist out by hand, and you can clean them and pop them right back in. So that was the 17 pages or so of 27 pages or so of the O&M manual. That was specific to the Series 3000 that I wanted to use as a guide. Again, take us up on our inspections. If you have a different style cooling tower, a closed circuit cooling tower that you're concerned with, or you've just recently taken over the building and you're not quite sure how it operates, let us know. We'll come out, explain the function of the tower, take a look at some of the components, and again, make recommendations on what should be replaced and what shouldn't. So again, this is going to be kind of I lost my train of thought. Kind of a review of what we just talked about. So as you can see here, the water distribution, we're talking about the inlet strainer. You always want to keep that clean if there is one there. Hot water basin, you want to make sure that your water depths, as you can see to the upper right, that is a centrifugal fan cooling tower with a pressurized distribution spray header. That one looks pretty good. You can see an even distribution over the fill or the coil. I believe that's a coil product. And again, the tower is going to operate more efficiently and prevent scale buildup if you have even water distribution over the entire fill. Scale buildup or any biofilms tend to develop when you get into a wet dry situation. Also, if you have uneven water flows during the winter, that's when you can get some ice. You know, if you've got water simply trickling out of one because of a plugged nozzle, there's more opportunity to develop ice there than there would be if you had nice, even, full flow. You know, inspecting the nozzles down below, that's the picture I was telling you about. That's a hot water distribution basin. All of these little black circles are the tops of the nozzles. As you can see, he's got one in his hand. He's twisted out, probably cleaned, and he's going to pop back in. Be very careful not to stick anything down below to clean them. You may end up damaging them and then have to replace them anyway. This is just an engineer's rendering of the distribution pattern in one of those spray headers in the nozzles. As you can see, you know, the water comes out, hits these deflector plates, and mechanically spreads, you know, over the fill. So if you were to pull if we jump back a page, if you were to pull your drift eliminators off of this tower and see uneven water flow, that would indicate that some of these, that would indicate that some of these nozzles are clogged and need to be removed. In this case, you would have to unscrew the nozzle from here, clean it out if you can't clean it out in place. This is some nasty fill. This is could be simply just dirty water, untreated, a system that has been ignored chemically, or it could be, you know, something that sat for a while, been shut down for a while, operated periodically, and you get that wet-dry operation. This is, on the left here, you see the good fill, bad fill. This is what you want your fill to look like. I have a funny suspicion that this is a picture of a brand new tower because there's not even a salt mark on that. But again, this is, on the left is the goal, on the right is what you're looking to avoid. Mechanical drive system, just kind of a breakdown again. You know, you get your bushings, your fan, belts, gears, bearings, shafts, motors. I would think for the most part our part sales is bushings, you know, belts. Very often do we replace an entire fan. The shaft usually stays in pretty good shape for an extended period of time. So, and the motors are pretty rugged as well. The motors are specifically designed for cooling tower service. Again, another breakdown that I kind of like, it shows you the nomenclature, if you will, for all of them. You have your fan assembly, the fan bushing, locking collar, flinger collar, you know, upper bearing, lower bearing. Just gets everybody on the same, the driven bushing, just gives everybody the same, puts everybody on the same page when we're talking replacement parts. Motor, I mentioned the motors are specifically designed for cooling tower service, designed so that water's not going to stay in there. If anybody's been inside of a cooling tower, it's a pretty violent atmosphere. It's hurricane conditions. We have, you know, very high winds, and we're introducing water to it. So you need bearings, bushings, you know, fan shafts, fan motors. You need everything that can withstand a pretty violent corrosive atmosphere. Specially designed bearings, again, everything's done to try to prolong the life of them. Even though parts is an important business for us, we still need these things to last quite a while to keep our reputation in good standing. So, again, everything's specially designed. This is a little bit of the propaganda where they say BAC is the only source, which is true. And you do know that if you get it from BAC that we're going to stand behind the product and you're going to get something that's designed for that specific cooling tower. And I would also say the same thing when it comes to the other manufacturers. I mean, me personally, if I'm buying parts, I want to make sure I got the right thing, you know, when I go to do my repairs. So, automatic bearing greaser, this is an option that comes, that's available, replaces the monthly manual bearing maintenance. Generally, we do not sell a lot of these, but we do see extended lubrication lines. When at all possible, I think it's important to ask for extended lube lines. We try to provide them, you know, at all times, even though it is technically an option. It just makes it so that you can you can lubricate your tower without having to crawl inside of it. Recommended spares, bearing set, float valve, float ball, solenoid valve, power band, nozzle kits. Depending on your installation, if it's a critical installation, you want to keep up on the shelf. You want to keep parts on the shelf that is going to get you back up and running and keep the facility in production and keep making money. As I mentioned before, Randolph, Mass, we do stock some components, heaters, gaskets, power bands. We have a few motors, I believe. Baltimore Air Coil stocks all of this stuff. 48 hours. They can get a part out standard 48 hours, quick ship. If the order's in by 2 o'clock, they can get it out that same day. So parts are available if you're not a critical application, but it is recommended to have a few on the shelf. Again, this is kind of a crossover for the parts / design. We can upgrade your tower depending on, how old it is. We can, switch to a premium efficient fan motor. We can improve the fan design. Depending on, we do have several projects that get retrofitted and they want to add a little bit more capacity that can't be maintained with the existing tower. We might be able to put on a bigger fan motor. We might be able to put on a different fan to give you a little bit more performance. And again, that's all stuff that we can help with the design on. Superior engineering, you'll see this slide on any manufacturer. I can tell you right now, the big 3 cooling tower manufacturers that you probably have on your building, they all spend a ton of money on research and development, trying to provide the most efficient, most cost-effective, longest-lasting product on the market. Most of our equipment has a standard 1-year warranty on the tower itself. You have that 5-year drive shaft or mechanical drive system warranty, including the motor. When you go to a stainless steel cold water basin, which we highly recommend, you get a 5-year leak-proof warranty there. It's a welded basin. They basically fill it with water and test it after the weld during the manufacturing process. Typically, the engineers in New England who we deal with all put a stainless steel cold water basin on their towers. It's the most expensive component in your open cooling tower. It's also the most expensive to replace because generally now you're talking about getting a crane. So when at all possible, if you have any influence, you definitely want to make at least your cold water basin stainless steel. The materials, G235 galvanized steel has become the standard. A little bit more propaganda. BAC has a Balta-Bond corrosion protected system, but we can go to 304 stainless steel that everyone does. We're starting to see a lot of all 304 stainless steel cooling towers, specifically for state-owned properties, university-type projects, where owners are going to be there for a number of years. We're starting to see a lot of people opt for the all stainless steel to prolong the life of the tower. Again, parts with specifiable differences. That's kind of a holdover from their parts presentation. We've talked about all of these things. Drift eliminators. Our standard drift eliminators are PVC material. They last forever. We can provide galvanized drift eliminators if required for FM approval, things of that nature. Again, duplicate slide. We've talked about the quality of their components. Again, the greaser, the motor. This is just showing, this is for the centrifugal fan. On the left, you'll see the stainless steel shafts. On the stainless steel, we can get away with a smaller shaft. We also use galvanized, but again, that's an upgrade that'll prolong the life. With your shaft, sometimes it's hard to decide whether you got a little surface corrosion or whether that shaft is ready to go. So stainless steel shaft upgrade is not a bad idea. Centrifugal fan on the side, fan blower here, the squirrel cage. What concerns do the owners and operators have? In the middle of it, when you guys are trying to keep your building up and going, you're worried about,
maintainability, but your owner's worried about the operating cost and then the energy consumption. So everything you guys do, is especially keeping the cooling tower clean and operating effectively does address the bottom line. Location considerations, as we talked about, if you're on the ocean, you may find yourself replacing components more often than if you were in the middle of Central Mass. But that's, usually taken into account. I know most engineers, really spend a lot of time in the early design on making sure that the materials they put in are going to last as long as possible. Cooling tower upgrades can reduce energy usage, simplify maintenance, improve performance, lengthen life expectancy, and delay replacement expense. Fan belt drive system, I think this kind of shows you that the heavy-duty industrial gauge that these belts are, I believe, we provide belts up to 75 horsepower, at least up to 50. Sometimes on the big towers, 75 to 100. You need the gear to get that big fan started. But, we have no hesitation providing at least up to 50, 60 horsepower. Pony motor, years ago, this was the poor man's VFD. We'd supply a motor that was approximately a third of the total fan motor, so that if 75% of the year you're running at reduced capacity, we can run at that smaller horsepower. But these systems have kind of been replaced by the VFDs since the cost of VFDs has come down significantly since we were using pony motors. Improve accessibility and safety. These are options we talk to the engineers about for your benefit. As you can see, generally over here on the left, a lot of times these towers you'll see handrails that you have to walk around on. This is a nice upgrade that allows you to address the hot water distribution basins from outside and stand comfortably. And then as we move across the page to the right, those are internal service platforms. Most engineers who are really thinking about the owner are going to include those. As you can see, this gentleman here is adjusting the belt tension on that motor, and he's standing there comfortably and not hanging off the ladder with one arm and one leg. Again, another example of that external service platform. As you can see, the gentleman inspecting the hot water basins without too much, without any danger, doing it very safely. Get to know your local cooling tower representative. As I said, most of them will come out and do free inspections. It's a free resource. The factories love it when we do. We earn brownie points with the factory whenever we can send in a card to say, hey, we did this inspection. Can you give us a quote on these parts? And again, we're going to be honest with you. We're going to tell you, hey, you can limp through another season or, change this. But, in 2 to 3 years, you're going to be looking at replacing a tower. For someone, like this, it also helps with budgeting for next year. Got a few funny slides they slipped in here. Before we started the presentation, I talked to Tom and I said, whenever I end up on sites, I wish facilities guys were involved with the design team, early on so that they get exactly what they want, since that you guys are going to be the ones living with it. So a couple of funny slides here. How the customer explained it. This is what they said they wanted. Here's how the engineer designed it. Here's how marketing described it. This is, the sales pitch. This is how we documented it. This is what, we own. This is how it was installed, and this is how you were billed, and then this is what you really needed. So, what we try to do as a rep, is give you guys exactly what you need. And unfortunately, you guys are not always involved in the early design, but, we try to encourage engineers to use things that are going to make your life easy. I know 2 of the 3 manufacturers, whenever they're developing new products, they invite facilities guys, service techs, contractors, and engineers to the factory to, I don't know if anyone saw the Bruce Willis movie Armageddon, but, picture when they were on top of the, asteroid mobiles, the vehicles, and they start whipping out things saying, don't need this, don't need this, don't need that. I picture all of those gentlemen down there, ladies and gentlemen down there, ripping apart their cooling towers to help them complete their design. So why do we do inspections? To provide a service, to let you know we're there for you guys. And that's really about it. Before I jump into questions, I wanted to briefly touch, BAC does not present on chemical treatment, but chemical treatment is just as important, maybe more important than anything that we just mentioned. Maintaining water quality to protect the to protect the materials in your cooling tower is essential. I had a guy call me up to replace a cooling tower, and it was a 1986 cooling tower, and he asked me what he could do differently to prolong the life, and I laughed at him and asked him if he wanted to be on the cover of our brochure, because whatever he was doing was working. So chemical treatment, all of the O&Ms have certain levels. So your chemical treater, whether it's a traditional liquid chemical, solids chemical, or even a non-chemical treatment system, still require a service visit to take readings, to blow down the tower, and to reset the conductivity levels, and to make sure that your water is within the manufacturer's guidelines. That also helps with the biologicals. So what it's doing is it's protecting your system. We also recommend putting some sort of filtration, whether it's a centrifugal separator or a sand filter on the system. The cleaner you can keep your tower, the less likely your chiller barrels or your heat pumps are going to foul, and the better your chemicals are going to work. I personally recommend centrifugal separators because it uses less water than a sand filter and still is effective to keep a condenser water system clean. So with that...
Can you discuss about the gray water?
Oh, the gray water. Yeah. There was a question in the first session about using gray water. We do have systems where we have been involved with gray water systems and rainwater harvesting systems, and generally on the bigger jobs, the bang for your buck is cooling tower makeup, because if you've got a large installation, your cooling tower makeup could be in the millions of gallons of water a year. So rainwater is tricky because you have to filter it. You got to be very careful filtering it, whether you're pulling it off a roof, and you have animal waste that you got to contend with, or if you're pulling it from a parking lot drain where you have to deal with antifreeze and oils and gases and stuff. So that's very thing. But if you're using a non-chemical water system, we see people using the blowdown from a non-chemical water system to irrigate, to send back to their cooling tower for makeup. It's more prevalent in other areas of the country. The Southwest especially, they'll use a non-chemical water treatment, use that blowdown to water their vegetation. So they're earning LEED points for their project. There are certain areas, I believe Philadelphia and New York City, the government has actually mandated the use of gray water, rainwater, things like that. I'm not an expert in the field, but it is a possibility. It's coming. Usually what happens in California as far as regulations, comes east, and there's water shortage in California. So everything they do out there is about limiting the water usage. So whatever we can do to save on that city water makeup, if we can put in, chemical treatment that allows you to reuse that water, that's fantastic. MWRA water is fantastic for non-chemical systems. Cambridge water is not so good. So it all depends, where you want to use it. The non-chemical systems that most people are familiar with, it's 2 electrical pulses. The first pulse changes the charge of the particles in the water. So instead of adhering to the metals in your system, they adhere to each other and fall out. The second charge actually attacks the bacteria, so it damages the bugs. An average bug lives for 48 hours, and if you damage their membrane, they spend their entire life trying to regenerate that membrane so they don't reproduce. So it's pretty interesting. I could do another 4 hours on that, but 4 o'clock traffic is going to be fun as it is. So I will open this up to questions. Any questions? Here we go. Still working off the... again, I will, I would offer you to, make some phone calls. Tom's going to share contact information and any other information we provide after the fact. But, if you find yourself on a new building with a piece of equipment you're not familiar with, give us a ring. Most of us sales guys and our service guys love to be out of the office. And, if it's a nice day up on the roof in Boston, you can't beat that. So we'd love to come in and talk through your systems with you, take a look at your tower or whatever equipment you have. So don't hesitate to use us. And, again, it's a free service.
Okay.
Is that it?
I think so. All right.
Well, thank you, everybody.
Yes, thank you, Chris. And remember, we'll be posting a recording of this presentation on our website. We'll be actually recording the first presentation on our website. That's the one I recorded. So if anybody in your facility needs to, or you think you want them to review this, then give us a little bit of time, and when we have it posted, I'll make an announcement. So thanks for your attendance, everyone.
You guys were in luck. The second one was better than the first one. Thanks, guys. Gals. Yeah. So how are you? How's Kimball? It's okay. Yeah?
I like it.
Good. I'm,
Sorry, we're working here.
No, that's all right. I gotta come up and see you. Have you met Mr. Babin?
I don't
Steve
think
Babin?
so. That's not familiar.
So Steve looks like Chris Farley. Would remind you of
Chris Farley?
Yeah.
Holy cow.
No, like legit. Like,
Did he act like him too?
yeah. Like
The band.
Like he got to a point when he worked with us before. This is like his third